Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes. We are with Mr. Eclipse, our now level 37 Dominator. And today we're going to be talking about YouTube algorithm and whether they're screwing over D&D channels. And we're going to be talking, if we have time, about content skipping by player characters in role-playing games. But before we do that, just some updates. It has been quite a while since I posted to YouTube. The main reason for that is that I was out of town for almost 2 weeks visiting my sister over Christmas and couldn't play any City of Heroes. And right before that, the week before Christmas, I found out from the chair of my department that because one of the members of my department, two members of my department, suddenly retired. I think what happened is they put in for retirement at the beginning of the school year, thinking that they would be allowed to retire at the end of the school year. And either there was miscommunication or what have you, but Human Resources came back and said your retirement date is December 31st. And they found that out around Thanksgiving. So the chair had to suddenly scramble, and she assigned me to teach a class I've never taught before. It's just General Biology 1, but I haven't taught it here before. Actually, never taught that class before. I've taught Bio 2, I've taught zoology and things like that, but I've never taught just a basic Biology 1 where you're introducing biology students to things like chemicals and macromolecules and stuff like that. So I then had to take some time to prep that course, and a lot more time than I would normally need to because it's a new textbook and all of that stuff. So I've just been really busy and really swamped, and I have not had time to play many video games at all. I've done a little bit of House Flipper. I'm basically done with that campaign, so I'm probably going to be picking something else. I've been toying with the idea of Flight Simulator, but it's got some bad reviews. I'd kind of like to try it. It's also very expensive, so we'll see about that. Not really sure. There's a couple of other games I'm looking at, but right now we're doing Mister Eclipse, and he's level 37. So let's just take a look. We're working on Mass Duplicity, and I believe this is the end of the story arc. We have to fight a false nemesis. We've got plenty of inspirations. We should be okay as long as we have domination up at the time, so we're going to have to be very conservative with that and make sure we don't pop it when we don't need it, because we're going to be fighting an elite boss, and we're going to need to deal with that. This power possess has been utterly useless against the nemesis. It simply doesn't work unless you're under domination. So that makes it very tough for us because it's the only other power that really locks down enemies. This fear misses all the time. I don't know what the problem is with it, right? Because its accuracy is actually pretty good, but when I throw it as a cone on three guys, it misses two of the three. And even when somebody gets hit with it, they don't cower all the time. I think they're just debuffed. So it doesn't act as a hold, it acts more as a debuff, and this thing never seems to work. So I don't know what it's supposed to do, but it almost never holds anybody. So I just don't even throw it anymore because I can't figure out what it's supposed to do. Like, it says that it's a location AoE foe hold and foe minus to hit, but I've hit in an area with it and seen everybody just turn around and run at me. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't, so it's certainly not the guaranteed hold that this thing is. So it's made it a bit of a struggle with Nemesis. They've been more challenging than the other enemies, and we're going to have to be very careful when we go up against the false Nemesis to make sure that we're under domination, so that this thing will work on the minions, and this thing will hopefully work on the elite boss after we throw it a couple of times. We also can use our haunts. And so let's take a look at how things are enhanced now. I've upped slots on Living Shadows, but I don't have any damage IOs to slot in there. I'm not going to bother to put SOs in. I'm going to just wait till I get IOs. Same thing with Moonbeam. Everything else is pretty well slotted. I've upgraded all of our level 35s to 40s. In the SOs we have left, we really only have about maybe 33% of our slots that are SOs. Hopefully by the time we hit level 40, 41, most of those will be switched over to IOs. So we're going to Paris Park, and we're going to try and defeat the false nemesis. And so we're going to go to the base. And as we go, let's talk a little bit about YouTube and the YouTube algorithm and what's been going on. There are a number of formerly very successful YouTube channels that have faded away. And a couple of prominent YouTubers, including Guy Scandlers, or whatever his name is, where am I going? Who is the guy who runs the Great GM channel, has said, I'm done. Now, this guy has hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and I mean, I've watched, I don't know, dozens of hours of his content. I haven't watched everything he's put out, but I've watched a lot of it, and he's great. and he gives a lot of good advice and good information. And so he's got a couple 100,000 followers, but I guess what's happened is the subscribers aren't all watching, and he isn't getting new subscribers who are watching. So what's happened is this unfortunate spiral. We don't have to worry about it on this channel because we don't even have 1,000 subscribers. We have less than half of 1,000. We have like 400, and maybe 30 or 40 of them watch at any given time. But what happens is when you have a channel where you have a lot of subscribers, but only a few thousand people watch, right? So he has like something like 250,000 or something subscribers. Don't quote me on that. But only maybe, instead of 100,000 of them watching his videos, it was only maybe 4,000, right? I'm making up numbers, but it's something like this. And when that starts to happen to a channel that had formerly had tens of thousands of views, YouTube decides that people aren't interested in the content and stops showing the content to you as a potential thing to watch in your like landing page, right? So what a lot of people do is they just go to youtube.com, and then whatever it shows them on that front, the 15 or 20 videos it shows you on the front page, they start clicking on stuff. Now you can subscribe, and I have subscriptions, and I go and I look at my subscriptions, and you get a little dot next to it when there's new content. Sometimes YouTube will show me that on the front page, but a lot of times, going the wrong way, a lot of times it doesn't. And I have to think to go in and click on that stuff myself to see what they've done. Now, just because I subscribe to your channel doesn't mean I'm going to watch everything you put out. As a simple example, if I've got 10 minutes and I see that your video is 45 minutes long, I'm going to want to watch the whole thing someday. So I'll just, keep in mind that, oh, we got Richter here. We can possess them. I'll just keep in mind that there's something to look at here, and I will come back and look at it when I have time, right? A lot of times what determines whether I'm watching a video, it just is I have in mind how long I want to watch or something like that. Like I'm going to run some City of Heroes missions. I'm going to listen to somebody for a little while. I know that it's probably going to take me about a half an hour to run the missions, so I'm going to look for a 30-minute video, right? If it's 25, 45, that's, probably enough. Oh, gosh, we're already at the false nemesis. I didn't realize that. Okay, not good. Let's get some help. We don't have our domination built up yet, but he's all by himself, and he's just a boss and not an elite boss, so that's pretty good. Maybe we're not actually going to fight the elite boss in here. Maybe this is just our first encounter with him. Yeah, he's nothing. We got him taken care of. So yeah, if I know I'm going to be playing City of Heroes and I plan to play for half an hour or something like that, then I'm going to look for a 30-minute video or a couple of 15-minute videos, right? But I'm not going to look for an hour-long video. Seriously? That's the end of the story arc? Okay. So some of what makes me decide to click on a video and watch it is just how much time I have at the moment and whether I feel like I have enough time or it's the right running time for what I want to do right now. Okay. We're going to dismiss this guy. We'll resummon him when we get to the next mission. We only need an hour and a half. And now we're going to head to, let's go do Gordon, Stacy, and Brickstown. So, I don't know how other people make this decision of what to click on or not. But one of the things that has consistently frustrated me is that if I'm subscribed, say, like I haven't watched Me, Myself, and Die's fourth campaign, that Trevor's fourth campaign. I have not had time, and this is not something I want to do under distraction. I want to be able to sit and watch it. And I've just been too busy since he started putting it out. I've been doing other stuff. And I got really involved with working on my Deadlands game and stuff, and I just haven't had time. And so at some point, I will sit down and watch all of them, probably over the summer maybe. I will just sit down and just mainline the whole thing. But because I haven't watched those, then when Trevor puts out another video, even though I'm subscribed to it, YouTube does not show that in my front page. So I have to go and hunt it down and find it, because he's put out videos about his game system, which I'm very interested in, and I've watched some of them, not all of them. One of the reasons I've not watched this campaign yet is simply because I know he's using his own custom-made game system, and I really want to sit down and watch how it works, and maybe even take some notes to see if I'm interested enough to maybe try to learn how to play it with my group. And I just have not had time to devote that brain power that I need to devote to doing that. I just have not had time. So eventually I will. But annoyingly, YouTube's algorithm will it just doesn't show me his stuff anymore because when it was offering it, I didn't click on it, so it's like, oh, this guy doesn't want it. No, I do want to watch it eventually. I want to see his other stuff. I have watched some of his other videos. I interviewed people and stuff, and I've watched that. I want to see everything he produces eventually, and I want to know when he puts something out, but YouTube doesn't work that way. And so what happened to Guy and to a couple of other channels is that since his subscribers aren't clicking on his videos, YouTube doesn't show them the next one and the next one and the next one, and so his channel's basically dying. And he said apparently he went to the YouTube offices in London because he lives in England, I think. But wherever he lives, he went to the YouTube offices and talked to them about it, and they said, "Your current channel is dead. Would you like us to help you make a new one?" He went there to find out what can I do to bring my channel back, and they're like, you can't. Our algorithm's not going to recommend it anymore. Your current channel is dead. What else would you like to do? Do you have some ideas for another channel? Which I just think is pretty bad. So he said, I give up. I'm not making up another channel, and they're going to basically hide all my videos from my potential viewers, so I can't run the channel anymore. Now, they're not doing it purposely. It's just that's the way the algorithm works. I personally hate the algorithm. You know, Luke Hart made a video he put out just within the last day or two on the DM layer saying, no, YouTube's not purposely destroying D&D channels. And he said, you kind of got to play the game and you got to play the algorithm. And one of the things he said was, do you really want something like, and I'm not quoting him, do you really want YouTube to keep showing you a bunch of content that you don't want to see? Well, I got news for you, Luke. I don't know what you're doing on YouTube, but for me, YouTube is constantly showing me content I don't want to see. 90% of what's on my landing page, would never click on, and YouTube shows it to me anyway. So I don't know. I don't know what happened when I was at work. Somehow, I must have accidentally clicked on something, and God forbid you accidentally click on a thing that's not of your interest and you don't watch it. Somehow YouTube decides, oh, you want to watch it. And there are these hoax channels out there that are, I'm a scientist, there are these scientific hoax channels, right? And they're basically created by practically AI. There's somebody using an algorithm. And they have millions of followers, and it's all of these BS stories like 8 minutes ago, life discovered outside the galaxy. And it's just a recycled story of how one of the Voyager spacecraft went outside the limits of the solar system, and there were some anomalous readings, and they're not sure what they mean, but it has nothing to do with life, right? It has to do with the way its messages are being received after going outside the Oort cloud. That's it, right? And that's all the video explains. And so I must have clicked on one of these once, and because I clicked on one once, there are a bunch of these clone channels that keep doing the same thing over and over again. They're all hoaxes. They're all fake. It's all lies. And YouTube just kept showing them to me. Oh, I got to stop using Possess. I still keep accidentally clicking it. So, yeah, YouTube shows me what I don't want all the time. And it doesn't show me what I do want plenty of the time. So, yeah, I hate their algorithm, but a lot of the content creators are suffering. So here's my comment to you. If you like a channel and you subscribe to it, try to make sure you watch those videos. Try to give it the thumbs up and the likes. You've got to support the channel. I'm not talking about my channel. My channel is irrelevant. There's only a couple hundred subscribers. It's practically non-existent from the viewpoint of YouTube, and there's, we're not worried about that. But I mean your other channels. If you watch Trevor Duvall, if you watch Dungeon Craft, if you watch the DM Lair, if you watch Critical Role, whatever your channels are that you like, definitely make sure you click on them, you subscribe to them, but also make sure you like and make sure you watch, because the biggest problem is that when people don't watch, I can't hit this guy. When people don't watch, then the algorithm stops recommending it, and then you're basically hosed as a content creator. So try to make sure that you're watching the things you subscribe to. And what Luke was saying was you've got to watch at least 50% of the video or they don't get real credit for it. Again, I don't really pay any attention to how that works because I'm not trying to like grow my channel or do anything special with it. We're winding down this character's story. We only have 13 more episodes left after this one, and I don't really know if I'm going to do anything after that. But it probably won't be City of Heroes, and I'm not sure if I'm going to keep making YouTube content. So we're not worried about my channel, but I do worry about the channels that I like. You know, I worry about Me, Myself, and Die. I've got to go back and start watching those because I don't want him to get penalized for the fact that although I'm subscribing to him, I'm not watching his campaign story. Same thing with Kill 10 Rats. I was watching him build his world for his Black Sword Hack playthrough that he's doing, I think, or Shadow Dark playthrough that he's doing. I want to see the rest of it. And I was over the holidays and final exam time and stuff. I had time to watch him set it all up, and I was making comments. And then over the holiday, I just didn't have time to watch, and I'm like several episodes behind now. And unfortunately, oh no, that's not what I want. Unfortunately, it's now probably penalizing him because one of his subscribers isn't watching every single episode all the way through. And you know, I know I'm just one person, but if a lot of us do that, that can lead to trouble. So um, just make sure you support your favorite YouTubers. Again, I'm not talking about myself. I'm not asking for likes and subscribes and clicks. I never ask for that stuff. This channel is irrelevant. I don't really care. But for the ones that you actually like and care about and that you want to watch, please make sure that you're giving them the like, subscribing, and also watch them. Because if they don't get the watch hours, YouTube will basically stop showing them to anybody and the channel will die, and then you'll lose the content that you liked. And so that's the YouTube stuff. And then the other thing I want to talk about is today Luke Hart made a really cool video that is very sort of, I guess, apropos for me, because I've experienced this myself. You're taunting me? I mean, that's kind of silly. I'm trying to attack you anyway. Oh, I forgot to bring my wolf out. No wonder I'm having trouble. I put him away and I forgot to bring him back out. So his video is called something like "I hate my players" or "Why I hate my players" or something like that. And he doesn't really hate his players, right? He's just talking about stuff his players do that he doesn't like. And well, the thing he was talking about in this episode was that he gets frustrated when his characters skip content, right? So he had stuff they could explore and things they could do and enemies they could interact with, and the characters just noped out of it. It was, you know, he's running kind of a sandbox open world, and the characters were just, well, let's just bypass it and go to the next thing. And I've had some similar stuff like that happen with my players in Deadlands, right, where they have skipped content and skipped whole acts of the plot point campaigns, and as a result, they've missed stuff that could potentially be fun for them. My feeling is if they skip it and they miss out on fun because they skipped it, that's on them. They have agency. They can do what they want, right? But what you have to realize as a player is that if you actively skip content, you know, like you have to think about it as you have to think like a designer even when you're a player, right? If there's a cave and the GM says there's a cave full of kobolds and they seem to be doing this, that, and the other, and he's describing stuff, and you go, okay, we're going to back out of the cave and not go in there. All right, well, you know the GM made up stuff in that cave. So you have to know as a player that your characters are skipping that stuff. Now, if you want to, that's fine, but you have to realize you've now missed some content, right? There was a scene in Critical Role where the player characters, They were investigating like a giant cave or something, and this is in season 2. And there was some sort of a large pit, and there were some dead bodies down there, and it was smelly down there and kind of creepy down there. And the players were like, "Oh, let's throw a fireball down there and just make sure there's nothing alive down there." And so they threw a fireball down into the pit. And it turned out that there was some sort of a goblin character down there that the GM, Matt Mercer, was expecting the players to interact with. He had created up a character sheet. He had probably figured out a voice to use for him. And I think it was supposed to be a recurring funny little NPC. And the players just blew it away by throwing a fireball down there. And so he just picked up the character sheet for the NPC and started ripping it. And okay, he's dead. And the players are like, "Oh, wait, no, we don't." Like he said, "No, that's fine. If you want to throw a fireball down there, you can." But the reason the players said, "Oh, wait, no, can we take it back?" is because they realized, "Oh man, we just opted out of what was probably going to be really awesome roleplay with a really cool NPC." Right? That's what you have to be careful of as a player. Right? I know you want to have your character do the things your character would do, and logically, a character in a world like this would be trying to avoid getting into combat and avoid putting themselves in danger. But the thing is, the whole purpose of being at the session is to put these characters in danger and enjoy getting out of it. Right? And so if you're going to keep trying to avoid the danger, then you're dodging the reason to have the game session. One of the things that happened with Luke was he said that the things that they were dodging were the non-combat stuff. So he was trying to put in the other pillars, the exploration, the social, and the players were avoiding that stuff. And they were only doing combat. And he said, well, they have nobody to blame but themselves because I tried to put the other pillars in there and they went around them. Right? So, again, this has happened in my Deadlands game. And here's the thing that does frustrate me a little bit. Look, if you want to go around the content, go around the content. Right? But when we talked about this in my group, remember I had the little anonymous survey, and one of the players had complained about using magical means to avoid actually using their brains and solving problems, and that they wished that we didn't use quite so many magical means to do that. And as we talked about how they've used puppet and object reading and divination to get around a lot of problem solving. One of the things that one of the players said was, well, even if we do that as a GM, you should still find a way to include the content. And I'm like, how am I supposed to do that? I don't know. Maybe some GMs could, but for me, it's like when you completely skip the information gathering step and use mind control to get somebody to tell you the information, how am I supposed to include the information gathering step? You already know it. Right? Oh, well, if we were supposed to get the combination to the safe from the hole in the wall gang, you couldn't have us encounter the hole in the wall gang in another spot. Yeah, I could. But the whole reason to encounter the hole in the wall gang is to get the combination. There's no other story for that gang. Now I got to make up another story, and I might be able to do it someday, but I'm not going to be able to do it in 5 minutes while we're sitting at the table. And now I've got to come up with a reason for you to go to a part of the map that you have no reason to go to, because the only reason you'd go there is somebody told you that's where to find the hole in the wall gang, and maybe they have the combination. You already got the combination. You're not looking for the hole in the wall gang. You're not going to go to where they're hiding out, so why would you encounter them? Now I got to make up another whole story. Right? And depending on my ability to come up with that, I may or may not be able to do that. Right? I mean, I said this before about my best friend. Just because he thinks there should be a story there that could be written doesn't mean I'm going to be able to come up with one. Right? And it's true with any GM. Just because you think there's a story there doesn't mean your GM is going to be able to make one up. Same with backgrounds. There was a whole argument going on apparently on the internet now because the new Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide have things about using character backgrounds and integrating them into the campaign. Just because you make up a background element that you think ought to make a good story that I could use doesn't mean I'm going to be able to come up with one. When my best friend had left the story hooks, quote unquote, in his character that he was looking for his girlfriend and he was looking for his mother, and he had whatever weird stories about his, like, oh, his girlfriend was a free spirit and she could never be tied down and she just left, right? And she went off to, seek her fortune. He thinks there's a cool story there, but it took me a year to figure it out, right? Same thing with his missing mother, and she like left him and abandoned him, and somebody was hunting her, and she left him for his own safety. He thought there's a cool story there. It took me over a year to figure it out. Just because you think there's a cool story somewhere doesn't mean the game master is going to be able to figure it out. And just because you think that when you skip content, the GM should be able to figure out another way to get the content in there, doesn't mean he's going to be able to. And the other thing I pointed out is, if you use your abilities to skip an encounter, and I make you have it anyway, then in a sense I'm taking away your agency. Right? It's sort of like, it's not the lazy dungeon master, it's the no prep GM. And I absolutely hate this system. Right? The no prep GM says, well, if you want the first encounter when the players walk into a cave network, you want the first encounter to be a troll with a bridge, right? A bridge going over some chasm with a troll. Then what you do is you can give them 3 corridors to go down, and whichever door they open first is going to be that encounter, right? So they have, quote unquote, the agency to decide which door to open, but whatever door they open, the first one they open is going to be the troll encounter. So they can't break the campaign by the adventure by going into the wrong room first and not encountering the troll yet, right? But if you do that, you're taking away player agency, because the players decided to go to the west, and another group of players would have decided to go to the east or to the north. It doesn't matter which door you open, you're still going to encounter that troll. Then we may as well just have one path through the dungeon and no choices, because that's what you're actually giving me. Same thing with my player characters. If they got the combination to the safe that they were trying to open by doing object reading, and they were able to open the safe, allowing them to skip fighting the hole-in-the-wall gang, then if I force them to fight the hole-in-the-wall gang, I'm railroading them. I'm taking away the agency. Remember, agency is you have consequences to your actions. The actions have results. The actions affect the world, which then responds to the actions the players took, not in a pre-scripted way. This world doesn't allow me any agency, right? This guy cannot respond to the actions I take. If I start throwing AoEs on this guy, it's not going to do anything to him, right? And if he were a real character and I threw an AoE on him, he would become hostile to me, but he's not a real character. And therefore, I don't have any agency to interact with this character. I can just take his quests. The whole purpose of having a GM rather than a video game is that the GM can allow the world to accept your actions and respond to them, right? And react to them. And so the reaction my world has to the fact that the characters didn't need to get the combination from the hole-in-the-wall gang is that they didn't meet the hole-in-the-wall gang because the encounter never needed to be run. They never sought out the gang because they never knew to seek it out, because they never asked around about the combination and who might have it, because they had it from object reading, right? So that is a consequence of the object reading. If I don't allow that consequence and I force the encounter to happen as scripted anyway, then I've taken away the player's agency. Right? It's not a bad consequence. They didn't get less gaming, right? We've still played the session. It's just that instead of that encounter, they did something else, right? When they encountered the Headless Horseman, the way it was scripted was they assumed the players would come across the Headless Horseman and fight them. So they went to this canyon. They found the bodies, but not the heads. And I don't know why the writer of this book expected the players to just turn around and leave. And when they try to turn around and leave, they get to the valley outside the chasm where the headless bodies were, and the Headless Horsemen are there, and there's going to be a fight. And it was a brutal encounter because the Headless Horsemen cannot be killed in a permanent way. They come back 1 to 4 rounds, I think, after you kill them, or 1 round after you kill them, something like that. They come back unless you find their heads and bury the heads with the bodies in a grave. Now, my players already knew that ghosts in Savage Worlds have an anchor. They had encountered this before several times, and that if you destroy the anchor or you fix it, then the thing that's tying them to the world is gone and they will be dissipated, right? And they go back to the afterlife. And so they knew we have to find a way to destroy the anchor. What would the anchor be? Well, it'd probably be their heads. Let's go find the heads. So they looked down in the canyon and they said, let's go down there and see if the heads are down there. And they were down there, so they found them. And they came, the one character, and she climbed back up with the heads, and they buried the heads with the bodies. And I had them make some kind of skill roll, and they were done. Now, my mistake was I should have made it a dramatic task, and I do admit that. But that completely bypassed the Headless Horseman encounter. I think it would have been a brutally hard encounter, probably the hardest one we've ever had yet in Deadlands. I don't know if they would have lived through it. It would have been really tough and really challenging and probably really fun to run. And I think they would have liked it. But they skipped it, right? Because they solved the problem without combat. But if I had said, look, I'm going to make you run this encounter anyway, then I've taken away the agency of the players, and I've made it worthless that they actually went and used their noggin to solve the problem, right? And so, like, I don't really think that players skipping content is an issue. I mean, it can be an issue in the short term for you as a GM, because if they skip something that you had planned and they go off in an area that you haven't prepped yet, you can really have a bad session or like a very stressful session where you're like panicking because you don't have anything ready, right? But except for that, if you have enough ready and the players don't do something that you've totally not prepared for, and I am not looking forward to watching finding Paragon Protectors around here, by the way, because they're going to be nasty. Anyway, if you're, if we leave aside the idea that they might go into an area that you haven't prepped and force you to like do everything off the top of your head because you're not ready for it, and you start panicking, the fact that the players didn't fight the hole in the wall gang is not a problem. The fact that the players didn't encounter some other villain is not a problem. The fact that they didn't fight the Headless Horseman is not a problem. Right? It would only be a problem if that's all I had prepped and they skip it and they go on to the part that I haven't prepped yet. But since I had a lot more than that prepped, it was fine. Okay. It's only a problem if one of the players or one or more of the players want to experience every bit of the module that you're running or every bit of the adventure that you're running. Then it could potentially be a problem because they're like, but I wanted to do this. Right? I wish we could have done that. Right? And I think that's what one of my players was saying is, I don't really like it when we start skipping content by, using magic spells to skip stuff, right? And to make it easier. But on the other hand, what are you going to do? The characters can cast spells, right? And these spells do certain things. So I don't really feel like it's a problem. To me, the only issue is if you start thinking as a player that skipping content shouldn't skip the content. Like that, in other words, we should get the content anyway, even though we purposely skipped it. That's where I disagree with my best friend, right? Who's the player who said this. You guys chose to do this thing that allowed you to bypass a whole encounter. You shouldn't say that then it's my job as a GM to make you run the encounter anyway. Then why'd you bypass it? Right? Where you have agency here. If you wanted to fight the Headless Horseman, you should have just gone and fought them. Right? We shouldn't pretend that the players don't know that they're playing a game and that these things are designed this way. Come on. Especially when you know you're playing a written module. Now, one of the things I've found, and one of the things I'm actually thinking of doing, and by the way, guys, if you find this worth watching, drop a comment down below and say you'd be interested in it, because one of the things I'm toying with doing is actually doing a comprehensive review of some of the Savage Worlds content, particularly the Blood Drive campaign, which I have finished, and which I completely played through with my players, and also the Horror at Headstone Hill campaign, which we've done the main campaign. They're still doing some of the side quests now to clean things up, but I could maybe do a little bit of Hell on the High Plains, but I haven't actually run that. But if you guys are interested in my reviews of these things, and what I think worked and didn't work, and what the good bad points were, where the gotchas are, how to run it, etc. Let me know, and I'll be happy to do a review. I think there are a lot of problems with these so-called plot point campaigns, and I've decided I'm probably never going to try to run one as written ever again. And the reason is that although they give the players all kinds of freedom in between the plot points, right? Let's say there are 10 points that are in one of the plots, right? There's tons of freedom in between the plot points, but each plot point is a severe and completely inflexible railroad. And I really don't know what kind of players, if any, the guys writing these modules are used to playing with, because my players almost never do what is anticipated. Let me give you a great example. I played with my family over the break. I played with my 2 nephews and my sister. A single one-shot Savage Tale from one of the pre-written Savage Tales from Pine Box Middle School. So I just handed them out pre-written characters, and they just played. My sister was the animal lover. My one nephew was a medium, and the other nephew was like the class clown or something. And he was high charisma. I can't remember what his character was called. But the Savage Tale was at around midnight, each of the 7th graders gets a text message or a Snapchat, whatever, group chat from their computer science teacher. And it's very cryptic, but it says something about the moon and whatever. And my one nephew who loves horror, the little one, the younger one who's 11, said, "Oh, it's werewolves!" Right? As soon as he saw moon, he knew. It's actually where coyotes. But so these 3 kids are in their house, and what it says is the first thing they're going to have to do is sneak out of the house to go help the teacher. And my sister, who's an adult playing a child, said, "Should we call the police?" Why wouldn't you? And yet, the guy who wrote this Savage Tale, it never occurred to him, what the characters might call the police. And then my older nephew, who was playing the kid who was like the class clown or whatever, it says on his background that he has a really good relationship with his parents, and that they're fairly supportive and permissive of him. They support him, and they kind of let him do what he wants, and they trust him, right? So he's like, well, can I go tell my parents where I'm going? Right? And wouldn't they help? I think that my teacher's in trouble. I'm going to go take my bike at midnight and bike across town to a trailer park. Would you do that? Or would you say, "Dad, I'm going," like he went and he told his father, and I had his father like roll over and say, "Okay, have fun," right? But in reality, the father would probably say, "Okay, I'll drive you." And now that's going to break the whole story, because the whole story assumes that the player characters as kids are there by themselves, right? You tell a parent, the parent's going to say, "Let's call the police. Let's call 911, right? Why wouldn't you? But the writers of the individual plot points or the individual scenes, they don't seem to think anything other than the thing they thought would happen could possibly happen. And I don't know how you don't. I mean, I understand they write these things as novels that you could run rather than as actual adventures to run. But how you don't at least say to the GM, "Well, just in case this happens, here's what you do," I don't really know. Right? I mean, I know my own players. It's only one group of players, and when I'm making up a story, I I always write to myself, "Okay, if they do this, this happens. If they do this, this happens." And I try to project 4 or 5 possible responses that the players could have rather than only one. Right? But the writers of these adventures don't seem to do that. So in the plot point campaign, they give you a lot of freedom of what you do in between plot point 1 and 2. But plot point 2 is almost always going to go off, has to go off the way they said. And if it doesn't, you're going to break plot points 3, 4, 5, and 6. So what my players did. Right? They skipped around from Act 1, Scene 3, or whatever it's called, Episode 3 in the horror at Headstone Hill, to Act 3, Episode 2. Because Act 3, Episode 2 happens, quote-unquote, whenever the players go into the forest for the first time, the Aspen Forest. Well, they did that right away. So then I had to run that stuff then, and it was like kind of early, and they hadn't gotten a bunch of the clues and knowledge that the Act 3, Episode 2 anticipated them to have, which meant that some of the stuff that was supposed to happen, like, kind of was meaningless to them. And so, and the reason I'm not using my last break free is in case I need it later. We're going to resummon our wolf. Man, these guys are horrible. You can't hit them. And so, yeah, if you know that the GM is running a pre-written adventure, word of advice, keep in mind that the pre-written adventure writers, the guys who write these adventures, do not really account for you to do anything other than the most obvious thing. Even if the obvious thing is fairly stupid or fairly, what's the word for it? Blunt, right? Like just bullying your way into the china shop. Oftentimes they don't, if they think there's a combat, they don't give you, well, what do you do if the players try not to get into combat? So look, if you're playing what you know is a written adventure, Curse of Strahd, Tyranny of Dragons, whatever, do a favor for your GM and be willing to do the obvious thing. Or if you don't be surprised when you miss a bunch of the content, right? Because often there's only one way to experience that content, and that is doing the thing that the writer expected. Think about what is it, not the Temple of Elemental Evil, but the Princes of the Apocalypse, which is kind of a rewrite of the Temple of Elemental Evil. And we've talked about this. Luke Hart talks about it. They have several dungeons. I don't know, it's 3 or 4 dungeons. Let's say there are 4. One for each of the 4 elements, right? Like fire, water, ice. I think fire, water, earth, and air. And they expect the players to go through the dungeons round robin. So you do the first level of Dungeon 1. That's for level 1. And then the first level of Dungeon 2 is for level 2. And the first level of Dungeon 3 is for level 3. And the first level of Dungeon 4 is for level 4. And the second level of Dungeon 1 is for level 5. So the players are doing the first level content. They go down a stairwell or whatever. And all of a sudden they're facing 5th level monsters and getting their butts kicked. And as players, they thought, okay, there's got to be a way to go down here because module writers would give you a way to get down there. And they kept trying to find a way to get down, and they couldn't, and they were really frustrated. So they said, okay, let's try the next dungeon. And they went to the next dungeon, and it was level 2, so they were able to handle it because they were second level. And then they went down a level, and now it's level 6. And they were like, they got so frustrated, they said, Luke, we know this is a written. Could you please tell us what we're supposed to do here? Because this is really frustrating. And he finally said to them, well, what you're supposed to do is do the first level of each dungeon and then come around and do the second level of each dungeon and then come around and do the third level of each dungeon. And they all looked at each other and said, why the heck would anyone do that? We're here now. Why wouldn't we go all the way down to the bottom? Like, it's so illogical. And the people who wrote that module, it didn't occur to them to say to the GM, if your players try to do this in the wrong order, here's what to do to fix it. They just assumed the players would do this stupid, weird, uncharacteristic thing instead of the normal thing, which is to do one dungeon at a time and go all the way to the bottom and then go to the next dungeon so you're not constantly walking around the wilderness. So what you have to understand is written modules are like this. That was a particularly bad one where doing the obvious thing was not correct. But in most cases, doing the obvious thing and usually doing the most brainless thing, right? Just go attack that. Most encounters are written as combat encounters in most adventures. And so when you avoid them, you're technically breaking the content. You're avoiding the content, right? You're skipping content because then you don't have that battle. And usually not, unless you do a dramatic task or social conflict in Savage Worlds, which you can do, but most games don't have those systems. Oftentimes, if you end up in a negotiation, it goes much faster than a battle. The negotiation's over in 10 minutes. The battle would take an hour. And so if instead of 3 battles, you have 3 negotiations, you're done in 30 minutes with what the GM thought was going to take the whole session, right? We think about my best friend. They met an astral dragon, and I had a battle all set up for them. It was neutral. I didn't know what they were going to do, and they negotiated with it. And as they got to the point where it looked like the negotiation was going to work, my best friend, I've told this story before, went out of character and said, "Hang on, guys, as players, it looks like we're going to succeed at this negotiation and not fight the dragon. But do you guys want to fight the dragon?" Right? Because he recognized we're potentially skipping pretty cool content here, because despite the name Dungeons and Dragons, you don't get to fight dragons all that many times. My players fought 2 dragons and 1 very powerful dragon-powered level dragonborn in 2.5 years. So they could have fought another whole dragon, right? They could have like tripled the number of dragons they fought, or added a whole like 3 instead of 2, right? Now added 50% more dragons to the number of dragons they fought if they had chosen to fight the neutral astral dragon, right? I purposely made it neutral so that it was okay to attack it, but you don't have to fight it, right? It was neutral. And so they decided we're not going to do it, but they also knew they were skipping content when they did that, right? I spec'd out all of the pirates in the astral plane that they encountered because I didn't know if they were going to fight them or not. Now, it turns out that they were willing to talk and work with them and not fight with them, but they could have fought them too, right? I left that up to them, but not fighting the pirates and not fighting the dragon was 2 very cool battles that we did not have. And the guy, the Minotaur, Captain One Horn with the broken horn, he was a pretty tough enemy when they were 6th level. But they chose not to fight him and instead kind of tricked him into letting them go, right? And so my point here is just that, like, look, skipping battles and skipping stuff shouldn't be an issue. But as a player, if you don't want to skip the content, then you need to do the obvious thing that you can obviously tell the writer of this adventure, whether it's your GM or the guy who wrote the book, expected you to do. And in particular, if you're playing a published adventure, you definitely have to do the most obvious, most bull in a china shop thing, because that's what most adventurers expect you to do. Right? You're a blunt instrument. That's what they expect you to do. They don't expect you to be a scalpel. They expect you to be a sledgehammer. And if you try to be a finely tuned scalpel, you're going to be doing things the writers of the modules didn't expect. And the GM is, that's fine. He can wing it and everything, but that means you're going to miss some content. Right? And my players missed probably the equivalent of one of the 3, well, they missed the whole second act of Horror at Headstone Hill, plus an episode of Act 1 and an episode of Act 3. So that's 5 out of the 11 acts, or however many. I mean, they missed almost half the content, right? The whole part of the Horror at Headstone Hill where there's supposed to be a riot in the town and the miners are fighting against Jerem Heaston, and the miners are being urged on by the cultists who are working for the evil tree. Well, the cultists are dead and the tree is gone. Now, there's still a miners' union and they still don't get along with Heaston. My players even talked about this the last time. They're like, oh, we thought Heaston was behind all the bad stuff. Turns out he's a jerk, but he's not evil. What they don't know is he's working for Hellstrom, and Hellstrom works for Pestilence. So there actually is another Reckoner involved in Headstone Hill, but they picked up stakes and left, right? So they're like, the whole second episode can still happen. I have it on the calendar. In a couple of days, there's going to be an article by the one guy from the miners' union who's been kidnapped by Heaston, saying we should all join with Heaston now. And the miners are going to believe, truthfully, that he is being forced to write this by Heaston because he'd never write it himself. And they're going to try and march on Heaston Manor. They're just doing it without the power of the cult now, right? And I have a whole thing ready to go. That whole act can still happen. And it will still happen in Headstone Hill in a couple of weeks. But my players, having solved the problem in Headstone Hill, picked up stakes. They turned in their keys to the rental house, put all their supplies on their horse, and left. So I don't know if they're ever coming back. And I don't know if they're ever going to see this second act play out. Right? They're skipping content again, guys. Well, that's what they've chosen to do. So I'm not going to get mad, right? And I don't care if I worked on some stuff that they don't do. Who cares? It's never a problem. I like working on this stuff, so whatever. But my point is that If you're playing a published adventure and you want to make sure you experience every plot point as written so that you can see what it was supposed to be like, you better do the most obvious thing and not do things like mind reading and stuff like that, because they never expect you to do that when they write modules, right? If you want to experience Curse of Strahd as written, then you'd better be super cooperative and just pick up every clue the GM lays down, get into all the combats he expects you to get into, and none of the combats he doesn't, right? If you're in Curse of Strahd and you walk into the shop with a friendly shopkeeper and you stab him dead and steal him blind, you shouldn't get upset that you missed all the content that was tied to that shopkeeper. You should know they don't expect you to do that. He's a friendly shopkeeper. They expect you to use him as a salesman. They expect you to be able to sell stuff to him, and he can give you some rumors. And if you kill him, all those rumors are never going to be heard, and none of the other little objects that he's going to have for sale later in the adventure are going to be available. You have to understand that, right? My players killed Frank Debney, who's the leader of the Miners Union and is also a cultist, and also ran the Smith and Robards depot in Headstone Hill. That means, and I told them, his store is shut. You can no longer order things in town that'll be shipped to you from Smith and Robards because you killed the guy who ran their outlet. Right? Eventually someone will take it over, but it's going to be a few months of game time, right? And so, again, that's a consequence. So whatever stories might have happened from that shop cannot happen now. And you also can't buy the infernal devices anymore, right? I was letting them order, because it says in the book you can, I was letting them order infernal devices from Smith and Robards, and they were getting elixirs and stuff sent to them. Well, you can't do that anymore. Because the guy who was the agent running the store, you killed him. Right? If you want to be able to order stuff from his shop, you shouldn't kill the shopkeeper. Now, he was a bad guy, deserved to die. He was supposed to die, just not this fast, right? But my point here is, it's perfectly okay to skip content. Skip whole chapters, skip whole acts. I don't care. But don't then complain, I wanted to see the content. As a player, you need to be self-aware enough and content-aware enough and understand story structure enough to know when you are going off the rails of the written adventure and make sure not to do it. And if you're like, I have no idea, use your common sense. It shouldn't take many times playing an adventure to figure out what the expected thing for player characters to do is and make sure you do it. Now, again, as a GM, I actually prefer when my players do unexpected things. I love that. When they come up with a solution I never thought of, it's awesome. I love it. Right? It doesn't bother me. As long as it doesn't bother them, we're good. If it starts to bother them, then I have to say to them, okay, if you don't want to cast spells that skip the content, stop casting the spells. What I'm not going to do is protect you from your own decisions. Because again, that's your agency. Your decisions are supposed to have consequence. So what do you guys think about those things? Comment. Feel free to comment about the YouTube algorithm and stuff. Feel free to comment about skipping content, but also feel free to comment if anybody, as I said earlier, wants to see me give a really thorough, comprehensive review, probably using the Foundry module, for either Blood Drive or Hard Headstone Hill. I could review possibly, I could also review Hell on the High Plains to some degree. I could do that. I'm hesitant to review any of the other plot point campaigns, The Flood, Good Intentions, Stone and Hard Place. Those are for Deadlands Reloaded. I've read through them. I'm going to use parts of them, particularly Stone and Hard Place, in my Hell on the High Plains campaign, because Jasper Stone's going to be hunting the party eventually. But I'm not going to play them as written, so I hesitate to review the other stuff because I'm not really going to play them. But Blood Drive and Hard Headstone Hill, I've actually played with my group through to the end. So if you want me to review that, let me know. Drop it down in the comments. If a couple people say they want to, I'll possibly go ahead and do that. I'm not sure how I'll do it, and I can't promise when. I think the first order of business is to finish up this character, and it's going to take a while because he's only level 37. So I hope you guys have enjoyed, and until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes.